We recently bought a house and moved in on November 2nd, 2019, but we've only been here a week and a half, and in that time we've had some very strange experiences, all between 1:30 and 2:30 a.m. on different nights. First experience and second night in the house. After having sex with his wife, I decided to spend the night in the well-prepared basement. I went to bed at 10 p.m. and got up at 12 when I heard the sound of footsteps on the carpet. I thought the kids might be running around, getting out of bed at night and coming into our room. I looked but didn't see anything. I checked the time on my phone but didn't pay much attention to it and went back to sleep. Around 1:30 I heard footsteps again, and this time they sounded like the footsteps of several people. I thought my wife and kids had come to get me, so I looked out of the futon but didn't see anyone. I started to flinch a little because I heard his footsteps, but decided it was all in my head and tried to go back to sleep. After lying there for a minute, I felt someone's arm supporting me. I stayed laying like that because there was no one else around. I threw off my blanket, ran upstairs, and climbed into bed with my wife. At that point, I was sure I was in a deep sleep or something. The second incident happened about 3 days after that night. The house had a built-in fire alarm system, so when one alarm goes off, all the alarms go off. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. We were all asleep upstairs when all of a sudden the fire alarm went off. My wife and I got up to check it, and 20 seconds later the alarm went off. We attributed it to our automated testing system because what else could it be? We went back to bed, but both of us were slightly agitated and on high alert. The third incident happened about a week after 2 weeks. It was yesterday, and it gave me an excuse to write this post. So I was sleeping in my baby's bed to help him fall asleep. My wife was sleeping with our 6-year-old in our room, and around 1:30 my son woke up and went to my wife. I watched her leave and continued to sleep. At about 1:40 a.m., my wife runs into the room where I was sleeping and turns on all the lights in the hallway, yelling that someone was coming. She said she and her son heard a deep male voice on the front steps of the house. I was very calm and decided it was a home invasion. I turn on all the lights from the top of the stairs. I yell, calling the police. No movement is heard, so I work up the courage to go downstairs to investigate. Heart pounding, I grab a kitchen knife and start exploring the house. Long story short, I can't find anything. The doors are locked. The windows are locked. The garage is locked. I go back upstairs and fall asleep after about an hour, when the adrenaline has weathered off and my poor wife can't sleep all night. So what do you guys think is going on? The house isn't old. It was built in 2002. The family we bought it from built the house themselves, and we're the only ones in it. No one has died here, and I don't really believe in ghosts, and this house doesn't seem like a candidate for this kind of activity. Is this all a coincidence? Do you have boyfriends? I can't find a reasonable explanation for what happened that night. It was a strange and truly terrifying experience. It all happened a few months ago. A friend of mine had heard that the northern lights might be seen in our area and asked if I wanted to drive out of town to see if we could see them. We set off after dark and drove around the neighborhood for a few hours, looking for a suitable spot. But after a while, we started to lose sight of the lights. My friend realized that we were near her hometown and was eager to visit the local cemetery to find the graves of her distant relatives. Recently researching his genealogy and all that. The night was clear and warm, and we were both a little disappointed that we hadn't seen the lights yet. We both wanted to flesh out the trip, so we agreed to run through the cemetery. We found the graves, took some pictures, and wandered around a bit. My friend led us using the flashlight on his phone, lighting the way and making sure we didn't accidentally step on the graves. Since we had arrived, I had been feeling uneasy, which surprised me. As an archaeologist, I've done a few projects involving cemeteries, and they don't usually excite me. In fact, cemeteries seem quiet and peaceful to me. But in this cemetery, I felt very strange, and often turned around because I felt like someone was standing behind me. However, I wrote it off to general anxiety and tried not to think about it. One of the many problems with anxiety disorders is that it's hard to tell when you're nervous. Even looking back, I don't know if my anxiety was in my head or something that happened in the past. But after wandering around town for a bit, we realized that it was almost 1 a.m. and it was time for us to go home. We headed towards the car. The car was in sight, and my friend was a few miles ahead when it happened. Suddenly, I felt nervous again and thought I heard someone running behind me. I started to turn my head back when I felt something hit me between my back and shoulder blades. There was a heavy feeling behind it, as if someone had actually hurt me. The impact was so hard that I was thrown forward and fell on my face trying to get up. I felt the weight on my shoulders again. I saw my friend running towards me because he heard someone running towards us, heard my first fall, and turned around to see me being pushed back. He told me about it later. He noticed my hat flattened in the back and changed, as if someone was pushing on my shoulders. He grabbed my hands and pulled me away as the weight disappeared, and we both got into the car, jumped inside, and instinctively locked all the doors. He didn't waste any time either, started the engine and quickly pulled out of the driveway. Then we drove away from him. For several minutes we walked without saying a word. I think we were both surprised, and more importantly, confused. Finally, he looked up at me. What happened? I didn't know how to answer. I told him someone threw me to the ground, he said. I know, but what? There was nothing there. We tried to come up with some rational explanation, but none of them made sense. Had someone attacked me and then thrown me to the ground? Absolutely. We'd be sure to see them. Had I been tricked? No. I definitely felt something push me, and my friend saw me being thrown backwards as well. Was it the wind? I don't think so. There wasn't much wind that night. Maybe I was attacked by an animal. That was impossible too. After all, no one could be big enough, strong enough, and stealthy enough to take down a full-sized man. Moreover, I could fully see my friend illuminated by the flashlight during the second fall, and his weight rested on my shoulders even as he reached me. He should have been able to see what triggered me, but there was nothing. In the end, we couldn't explain it, but whatever it was that made me fall twice, we didn't see it. As the adrenaline dried up, I noticed something else. My back was really hurting. Between my shoulder blades, where I felt the impact, I felt a sort of teasing or shaking pain. My back felt like it was being rubbed with rags. I told my friend about it, and she advised me to take care of my back. He turned on the hood, lowered my head to look, and I heard him say, "What's next?" The skin between my shoulders turned red, and a few small blisters appeared. Later they swelled and popped, and I felt like I had a sunburn or chemical burn. There was no scratch or cut. It was a relatively thin mark, but it was still obvious. And we certainly can't figure out how I got burned. I hadn't touched anything. I hadn't touched my back. I'd been wearing a hat all night, and there were no rips or marks on the fabric. God, that hurt. It stank for days, and it was very uncomfortable. I couldn't even sleep that night. My back hurt, and every time I started to walk, I suddenly felt someone standing on my shoulder, and I started to wake up. I couldn't understand what was going on in the cemetery, but it really shook me up. I don't know if I believe in demons or devils, but I know that something very strange and horrible happened that night, and it bothered me that I couldn't explain it, that I couldn't explain every strange detail. It's been really hard to deal with. I have PTSD from a previous assault, and there is something very disturbing about not being able to do anything to protect myself in this situation. And without a clear explanation, there's no way I can prevent something like this from happening again. Since then, I've had several dreams similar to the ones I've had over the years growing up. I don't know where they came from, but for as long as I can remember, I've had dreams where some sort of creature was trying to pull me in one direction or another, and in the dream I realized the creature was a devil or a demon. Sometimes it takes the form of an old woman. When I was 13 years old, I had a dream in which I was wandering through the woods and came across a small house with an old woman standing at the entrance. He beckoned me inside. I agreed, and for a while we chatted casually and baked cookies, but I felt uncomfortable around him, and knew he wanted something from me. At one point, I looked out the window and saw a group of people standing in the yard, watching an elderly woman. I asked who these people were, and I remember well what he told me. They want me to accept them, but I don't want them. I want you. In other dreams, he looked worse, but I always recognized him as the same creature. Sometimes I dream he whispers to me in the dark by my bed. He has a shadowy appearance, long legs, sunken eye sockets, teeth made of bee wire or something, and something glistening on his lips from blood or wine. In these dreams, I can hear him whispering, but I can't make out exactly what he's saying. Sometimes I dream of this same creature sitting on a chair in the corner of the room and eating a rotten apple. I have long suspected that this soul is a manifestation of some of my deepest and most disturbing fears. I know they are only dreams, but I remember them because they were repressed in my 20s. But an incident in a cemetery shook me up so much that they came back. The whole experience seemed to open the floodgates of my inner demons and shake up my perception of the world around me. In these new dreams, the creature is standing behind me in the cemetery. Time slows down. I see my friend frozen in front of me, and the creature is whispering behind me. I don't know why my mind associates this creature from the dream with my encounter in the cemetery, but fear keeps me awake at night. Anyway, I want to share this because I don't know what happened that night. My friend thinks it was a demon, but I don't know. I've never seen anything like that, and I don't know what to make of it. Thanks for listening. I'm sure I'll figure it out soon. I've always been interested in urban legends, horror stories, monsters, and cryptids. I was born in Minnesota, but have lived in Montana all my life, and consider the Southwest to be Yellowstone country. My family loves the outdoors, camping, hiking, backpacking, hunting, fishing, etc. Very well. We are regulars in Yellowstone and Glacier, the entire Rocky Mountain region, and often go camping if we are out of state. Usually it's not too far away, like Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, or something like that. Recently, we really liked the Island Park area in Idaho. I can't say why, probably because of the fishing, camping, and ATV access, but we just recently came to the area and have spent about 2 years there. So far, I've accumulated a lot of Island Park stories that I can share another time, and there's a lot of weird stuff going on. I really don't know if anything happened there, or much about the history, so if anyone knows, please share. But for those who haven't heard of Island Park, or been there, here's a brief explanation. In my opinion, it's one of the strangest places in the Northwest. Weird, because it has so many attractions and facilities. It's called a town, but it's just a long road. Imagine a main road in a big city that runs through the Targ National Forest, and off of that main road there are several roads, trails, and access points where you can find campgrounds and other things. There are some great neighborhoods where you can rent cabins, but I don't know of any that live there permanently. ATV trails are paved all over the place. There is really no urban development here. Everything civilized can be found on the main road, including a very good Mexican restaurant that I recommend visiting. So you'll drive on the same side of the road for days and not see a single person or gas station for miles. Don't get me wrong, it is a beautiful area with good fishing, and great if you want to get away from everyone, but it is a very unsafe area. There is nothing wrong with that, and I would recommend staying there. The people there are very friendly and the atmosphere is good, but sometimes I get bored there. For example, there are areas in the forest where all the trees look the same and are quietly dead, which really creeps me out. It reminds me of a story or anecdote about how Idaho doesn't exist, and the government made it up. It always makes me laugh because Island Park definitely gives that impression. But anyway, I got carried away with the description. Like I said, I have stories about this place. So, my family and I went camping at High Coffee Pot, which is very far out in the woods on Henry's Fork, and it's a beautiful place. We were at the very beginning of the campground, so there was a trail and another parking lot right next to us. All the other campsites are on the opposite side. This trail is very long. It looks like a riverbank, but it leads to Trout Hunters, a local guide site, about 11 miles from the campground. and this trail is connected to everything. On this day, we hung around the campground, fishing and lazing around, and around 3 o'clock, my dad, sister, and I decided to hike the trail just for fun. We got ready, put on our jackets and boots. The trail is so well paved, you could walk it in flip-flops if you really wanted to. But we didn't bring bear spray, and my dad brought a head flashlight because, like I said, it's a very popular spot, and we weren't planning on staying there for long, just in case. We're walking, talking, laughing, and I don't know how far I've gotten. According to my dad, we were near some trout fishermen. In retrospect, now that I've given it more depth, I don't think it was right. Eventually, it started to get dark, and we turned back. Nothing out of the ordinary, really, but everyone knows that your people are far from the signposts. There is no bear spray, and only one streetlight is lit at night. It gets dark very quickly here, and there is no moon at night, so we try to keep a battery of a headlamp in case we really need it. We walk in the dark, looking at the river and warning each other, "Hey, there's a weed over there, and watch out for water." Anyone who has walked the streets at night knows that time changes drastically after dark. I'm not crazy, and I'm a cool girl. I grew up the oldest of 3 girls in my family. My parents raised us to be very angry, educated, and outspoken enthusiasts. But I have my boundaries, and unfortunately, I'm the first person to get anxious or worried about anything. But on the contrary, my feelings usually turn out to be right, so when something should go wrong, my family knows to listen to me. Naturally, for whatever reason, I get a little anxious and start asking my dad, "How much more do you need? Did you bring matches?" We don't know what time it is or how long we've been on the road. Neither of us have had hours of fishing. And like I said, time is brutal in the dark. I'm trying to distract myself from the noise of people hearing and talking and focus on the road I can't see in front of me. I'm nervous because my brain and internal clock are telling me that there's no way we're traveling yet, but it's already time for us to head back. My thoughts run wild. What and whose are the real dangers, like bears and angry bulls? My dad is worried too, and decides to turn on his headlights to ensure safety. We all knew that there was only one way back, and that was to walk. But none of us were particularly happy with our current situation, which was our fault. Laziness and time wasted on our gear, but still. Soon we see the lights of distant campfires, but it's a very faint, tiny light, and we think we have to make 3 or more turns before we enter the vicinity of the campground. And then I got a feeling. I immediately got goosebumps running up my spine, and I shuddered for a second. And then a scream comes from behind us. It's far from it, but trust me, anyone can recognize that scream. I've heard a lot of animal sounds in my life, and most of them are beautiful, but this one was like a rabbit scream. I don't know if you've ever heard a rabbit scream, but it's awful. And I really mean it. A voice like that shouldn't come from such a small animal. But anyway, we all freeze in place and don't give up for a minute. Soon my father turns to us and says that the rabbit or something else shook the rabbit. I nod, flinch again, and we continue on our way. After about 30 steps, I stop again, and a feeling of terror mixed with horror pierces through my body. I can't think of anything, and I don't know why, but I can't move. Perhaps it's because of the events that have happened. About 20 yards away from me, a strange scream is heard. I can't describe it because I've never heard anything like it. It sounds like a low whisper, like a hum, like quiet laughter. And I know it sounds silly, but when I say laughter, I don't mean chain or joke laughter. I like to sing. For example, 2 identical words repeated rhythmically. Notice that the sound is very faint and low, but somehow I can hear how close it is. At this point, I run to find my sister and father, almost with my pants down. I'm worried as hell because who knows what's going on in there, and I'm worrying rather than reasoning, but I'm holding them and my sister is pink. I ask him if he heard a noise and he steps back, so he went after the noise. Yes. Dad looks at me and asks us to continue. I ask him if he's heard anything before, and he says it's probably the same thing we heard. I knew he was lying, but I didn't say anything because he was calm, and that helped calm me down. We keep driving around the next corner, and after a while we suddenly freeze because there are a few feet in front of us. Dad turns off the headlights, and we all hold our breath. If it's a bull moose, you don't want to catch it off guard, so we all wait for it. After a minute and another sound, we slowly drive on. My dad shines his headlights on the ground, and it suddenly stops. We want to find out what happened to my sister, so we go to look, and there are footprints on the ground. Dad told us to be quiet, so we slowly followed them. At first, they looked like sprawling, long, almost human-shaped footprints, or like a little bear, or a big hind leg of a rabbit or something. But none of us cared where we were. We just stare at those footprints. But then my dad looks up, and we find ourselves 10 feet from the beginning of the trail, 20 miles from our campsite. We see my mom and my other sister sitting around the campfire. Obviously, we are all almost relieved, so we just joke around and continue on the trail. We really don't want them following the campground trail. The footprints were getting smaller and smaller, closer together, and my dad thought it was very strange. From that point on, the story began to unfold. The prints began to look like a deer or a small sheep, and we were all confused. My father suggested that perhaps the deer or sheep had come out of the water, which made the footprints look bigger and longer. But how could they have changed from human or bear hooves to deer hooves? But that wasn't the strangest part. The longer we stayed, the more information we got, and the tracks turned out to be deer hooves, so unless we missed something, deer always have 4 legs, right? Soon the prints stopped about 5 meters from the trail and disappeared as well. My dad scanned the area. The footprints didn't go anywhere beyond the trees. They weren't coming back, and it was like something was lost at that point. My sister laughed and rubbed it like a 2-legged deer could fly. I felt uneasy and thought the darkness, strange sounds, and impossible footsteps had finally caught up with me. I ran back to camp and quickly scrambled into the bushes. I went to bed that night, but I was uneasy about what I had found that night. I knew I was safe, but some part of me knew there was something wrong with those footprints and sounds. The next morning, my dad woke me up and told me that our friend the deer had come yesterday. I jumped out of bed and went to look, and there were deer tracks all around our trailer. In the rest of the time, we saw no bipedal deer tracks, no human tracks, and heard no other sounds. I'm still amazed that those tracks disappeared, somehow replaced by another genre, the same horrible sound. I still tell myself they were deer tracks, but I'm not entirely sure about that. If anyone has any questions, please ask, and if anyone knows what happened that night, or gives us another interpretation of what happened that night, please let me know, as I am very interested. If you would like to know more about my other island park experiences, I would be happy to share them. Please let me know. I didn't tell anyone about this story because I didn't want to spread the word to my friends, so I limited myself to my mom and a few close friends, but now I guess you'll know too. So, how my friend group works. We have our own small circle of people that we hang out with often, but for big events, bonfires or something like that, we expand and 2 different groups of friends join us. Ben is part of the expanded group of friends, and he always posts something unusual and interesting. He always has something to say. I got to know Ben very well at these events, and we always ended up having a conversation. He always seemed different and a bit unique to me. This year, Ben started attending my local college. He sent me a snapshot in which he wrote that my friends go to different schools, and the only person I should hang out with in the area is now my ex. I was wondering if you wanted to get a group together and socialize because I want to make new friends. This was really good news because with the course I'm on, I can't make many friends, and my close friends are now scattered, so I agreed. At first, it was supposed to be one of my friends, him and his friends. I came home one day after school. He told me he was going to take a little nap before we all left. When he woke up, he told me that it was too late, and he had other plans that he had forgotten about. That was totally normal, so I wasn't too upset about it. I also canceled a meeting with another friend just to do my homework, but he texted me a few hours later. I didn't give him my number, but he had to know. He told me his other plans were canceled. He's working again now and was wondering if there was anything else I wanted to do. My friend said she was out of town right now. She texted her friend, but they didn't respond. He decided to pick me up, go for a ride, and just chat. It's okay, right? Ben arrives at my house around 10. I get in his car and he drives off. Surprisingly, he speaks with an accent, Jamaican or something. I thought he was just kidding, so I played along. Sometimes I'd respond with the accent, but then I started to think it was weird that he wasn't speaking in his own voice at all. He would also walk down the street like a maniac and tell me he was drinking because he thought he was going to a party. I asked him if he had been drinking and driving, and he said no, that he had only had a few sips. I know I should have gotten out of the car at that point, but we were already flying down the highway and I was scared. Now he started ranting about his ex, telling me that he has infidelity and trust issues and he can't tell me because he doesn't want me to think badly of him. He told me he was still going to marry this girl and have kids. He yelled about it, went off on tangents, and at one point started yelling and screaming. I was starting to think he was on drugs or something. We got to the college in another town, a half hour and 45 minutes away, and he said he had to get out of the car. I'm already scared and my phone is running low on battery, so I'm listening to him. Honestly, I thought he might kill me. He took me for an easy walk through the woods and then he started making noises that sounded like a strange creature. He sounded either like a dinosaur or a lung. He also walked like a creature, giving his body strange movements. I asked to go home because I was really scared. We got in the car and drove home. He was smoking a pipe. I told him not to do that, but he didn't listen, and now he started yelling. He started talking tangentially about life again. He gets out of the car and stops it to take a jump or something. At this point, my phone runs out of battery. He gets in the car and turns on his favorite song. The song starts off slow and then picks up the pace. It's like a 4-minute song where he starts screaming the lyrics and smashing the glass on the dashboard and steering wheel with his hands and feet. I've never seen anyone like a song before. This was on another level. Ben walks down the road until he reaches my house. Then he turns to me and says, without the slightest accent, "I know it's late, but do you want to have sex?" in the simplest tone in the world. I laughed nervously and replied that I was really good. He turned to the back seat to get something, but I got out of the car and pointed it toward my house. I locked the door of the house and the door of my room like it might break and not be a danger to me, but at that moment I was shaking with fear. I don't know if he was some crazy drug addict, split personality or something. I've never met anyone like that, but honestly, I looked at myself and thought, someday you're going to kill me. I hope he doesn't hear that because I see him at school quite often. But yeah, life is fun, isn't it? I've had a lot of stories happen in my life. I don't know what it is about me, but I'm attracted to unusual things. But I was going to say, it depends on the time of year. Last year it snowed this time of year. It was beautiful, but this is New York, so it's usually beautiful here in the winter. I woke up one morning, was doing my morning chores, and saw footprints in the snow that didn't belong to me or my husband. They were huge, very huge. The person who made them had to be over 6 feet tall, and I am about 5 feet 11 inches tall, and my husband is shorter than me. They started out of the driveway and came up to our kitchen window. It seemed like someone stopped to look out the window or something. They walked to the side, then to the back of the house, and when they turned around and went into the neighbor's yard, I followed them. They walked straight out of the neighbor's yard into the wooded area behind our house, and then stopped. In the center of the field, they disappeared. We called the police, and the policeman came back to watch them. He looked a little shocked and confused. He couldn't explain why they had stopped in the middle of the field. After all, it had snowed a few days before and hadn't snowed since, so it didn't look like fresh snow had covered them. Otherwise, it would have covered the other paths as well. The officer also asked about our neighbor. She's an elderly woman in hospice care, so she couldn't have laid the trails herself. I am writing about this here because I am 100% certain that these trails are not man-made. I don't know what they were made of, but I do know that seeing them dead in the middle of a field made me feel sick. I often think about them when it snows, and I dread seeing them again. What is special to me is that I also have dogs. In particular, I have two very perky dogs who bark if they hear scratches on the wall or see something outside. They didn't hear a peep that night. I should also say that our house is indeed haunted. After doing a little research, I found out that the last owner died of lung cancer. From time to time, we have heard shaking and heavy breathing in the house. I have seen ghosts, strange lights, and my husband has been physically hurt. Last year, we received a blessing, and things seemed to calm down a bit after that. I don't know if the footprints in the snow had anything to do with it, but it's still a very disturbing experience for me. Because if it wasn't normal, then who the hell was there? There's a hotel on the Bulgarian coast where we have an apartment. Honestly, that's a strong word, because it's a very large room with a big bed, a fridge, big windows on both walls, and a small bathroom. On the first floor, both walls face the hotel parking lot. Nevertheless, it is a great option for me. It is close to the beach, so I used to spend part of my summer vacations there. So 3 years ago in July, I spent a week with my ex-boyfriend, and then 3 or 4 weeks alone. They used to say about hoteliers that they were a bunch of assholes, because when we left the room, we had to go through the front desk, and they sat around all day basically doing nothing. An old father in his 60s, son Crumb in his 40s, daughter in her 45s, and husband. When you walk past them, they are all silent and look at you the same way they always do. I was used to it by now, but the guy was really pissed, especially when he saw Crumb looking at my ass and just smiling. After that, every chance he got after that, he looked her right in the eye. So, the ex left back to the city, and I'm in my 3rd week of living alone, and it's a very hot night, so I open both windows and pull the curtains so I don't have to look at myself. Eventually, I am above ground, and my bed is by both windows. I wake up in the middle of the night and feel like someone is watching me. It goes on like this for the next few nights. I get scared easily, and am a little paranoid. I've been there alone too, so I tell myself to calm down, and it's just my crazy fear. A few nights went by with no problems. Meanwhile, Crumb tried to talk to me 2 or 3 times when I was going to the beach. Around 1 a.m. I fall asleep and hear footsteps in the road. It's not so strange because there are people living next to me who live in the same apartment. Maybe someone is going home or going to a party or something. But the footsteps stop immediately, very close by. I can hear it all through the open windows, and I'm sitting on my bed, listening when I see the doorknob move slowly. I lost my composure, but praised myself for locking the door. Nothing happened after that, and the same man left. I closed the windows, called my dad, and told him what had happened. He told me to pack everything up and lock up, and he would pick me up in the morning, a 5-hour drive. That was 3 years ago, but last night we were having dinner and Dad asked, "Do you remember your sea adventures?" And he told me that he had done a little research and asked the hotel owners to provide camera footage. They checked the parking lot and saw a male figure walking. The part with the doorknob was out of camera range, but my dad woke up that strange night in the middle of the night and told me to check old footage where they see the man standing and looking at the curtains by my window. For about 15 or 20 minutes, the woman finally recognized her brother and told my dad he was mentally retarded and asked him not to press any charges and they would take better care of him and keep an eye on him. Good guy Dad didn't make any payments, and now it looks like we are selling the condo. Anyone interested in buying it? This was about 3 years ago in Big Bend National Park. My friend, my husband, and I went on a primitive hike. I'm not an avid hiker, but I've done my share of primitive hiking, backpacking, and so on, so I like to think I have a will in a way. Having grown up on 8 acres of forested land, I know what common animals are like. Coyotes were frequent visitors, so I know how noisy they can be. So I know that what we encountered that night was definitely something else. We arrived in Big Bend at 4 p.m., checked in, and pitched our tent at the Point 9 campground. There is a lot of space around the entrance to the park. The campground is about 25 miles from the visitor center and hotel, and 40 miles from the Rio Grande village, and we were certainly very close to civilization that I knew of. But we decided that after dinner we would go for a hike on the nearby trails, and while we were packing, I decided to look for a trail from our campsite. The terrain in this part of the campground is a completely flat desert with vegetation on the ground, so we figured the trail from our campground would be easy. The trail from our campground turned out to be easy, but as an extra precaution, I put down a few piles of rocks to walk on that night. After dinner, we decided to hit the trail at 10 p.m. The first 10 minutes of the trip were rough, and we were all in good spirits when suddenly we heard a noise 50 feet behind us. Accustomed to animal noises at night, we marveled at this, as animals do. A few minutes later, we heard the same sound, but a little closer and similar to the sound of a larger animal. There are black bears around here, but we were not where they are usually found. Like I said, the landscape was vast and we couldn't see anything with our flashlights. We felt a little uneasy, but we were ready to move on. The piles of rocks did a good job of telling us the right direction. I immediately stopped because I felt absolutely terrified. It was truly an indescribable feeling. I had seen many people on this stretch, but I didn't know if we were at risk or why. I looked at my friend and husband, who looked just as terrified as I was. There was no sound, no wind. But a moment later, the most inhuman screams erupted around us. It all seemed like minutes, but I'm sure it was only seconds. I don't remember deciding to go back, but the next moment we all ran. Although I thought we were running towards our camp, at this point we had gone too far. I remember scanning the piles of rocks I had made but couldn't find them, and almost turned back, thinking we were heading in the wrong direction. But I had an instinct that I definitely wasn't going to do that. We got to a huge rock that I knew was on the way to the campground. I also remember putting a bunch of rocks next to this rock and went to check it out as we walked to camp. The rocks were still there, but they were broken. This caused alarm, and I told my friend and husband that we needed to get back to camp as soon as possible. A few minutes later, we were back. When I got back, I was completely relieved and didn't want to stay. I think my husband did too, but my friend convinced us that it must be a wildlife park, so we stayed in a tent that night. I don't know if it was related, but there were scuffles and footprints around the tent all night. I didn't sleep, by the way. We didn't make this trip more primitive and opted to camp at one of the public campgrounds. In conclusion, I would like to say the following. Neither before nor afterward did I ever feel like I was in the woods at night. The next day I went out to see if all the rock piles had been destroyed. And they were destroyed. I don't think any animal would purposely knock down markers, right? I think it really makes me wonder. I don't know what it is, but I'm glad we did it. I live and work on a farm in southwest Australia, and one of my duties or hobbies is to look for deer to eat and kangaroos to control their population, as they are growing incredibly fast. A few years ago, in the spring, I was wandering around the borders of our small farm, which my grandmother, or Nono in Italian, had cleared for a farm, and I saw a path leading into a dense forest, thicket, or overgrowth. I climbed over an old rotting hedge with barbed wire around the perimeter and headed into a separate thicket of scrub that I knew I had not yet explored thoroughly. When hunting our local species of deer, mostly samba, but there are also boars and red deer and all that sort of stuff, it's best to move with stops. That way you'll match the general sounds of the bush and look like a predator. 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 So I took 5 steps, stopped to look around, then took another 5 steps, and so on. When I saw that my last 5 steps were unusually strong, or rather, everything went smoothly. There were no cows in the distance, no wind in the eucalyptus trees, no screams of cockatoos flying overhead. Dead silence. It was then that the hairs on my body stood up. I took the rifle off my shoulder and thought that perhaps I was being hunted by wild dogs. I was wrong, because as I looked around, my existential dread grew, and I thought I was going to disappear when I saw him. He was to my left and was a pale caricature of an old man with a red hat and no other features. It was hard to see him because it was as if he was in a heat haze, but I knew he could see well because the black dots of his eyes were aligned with mine. Standing 20 meters to the left of the road between the ferns and undergrowth, I couldn't even see his hands. That is, until you pick up the axe and look. and these are completely unlike anyone I've ever seen, so solid and clear are they. This action brought me out of my state of shock. Though I was terrified and didn't realize what I was looking at, I raised my rifle to my shoulder, pointed it at him, and cautiously began to back away. For a moment I passed the tree that concealed him, and in the same second he was gone. The voice immediately returned, but without warning, I heard familiar sounds and saw my surroundings clearly. I was still frightened and wandered through the bushes for a long time afterward. Strangely enough, Rue popped out of the bushes not far from the trail, and I just shot up out of fear. I got to the edge of the corral again, put it under my feet, hurried home and slept under the bed with the shotgun that night. Such a thing had never happened to me before, although I had encountered strange creatures in the bush. There are constant rumors of strange occurrences in the same area among farmers and locals, including stories similar to mine, though the details are different. I don't know what happened or what I saw, but it shook my perception of reality and changed me, slowly sinking in because it was paranormal activity and not just someone's joke. However, I didn't immediately talk to people about it. Then my brother was also shocked when I told him, and realized that a similar experience happened to me as a child in a small town called Yakti, located in the mountains near Mount Hotam, where a satanic cult was accepted. But that's a whole other story for another time. If you have, thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. Be careful even if you are in the woods or in the bushes. I went backpacking with NOLs during the semester. If you have never heard of them, they are an outdoor leadership school. This semester was a lot of rock climbing, rafting, backpacking, and kayaking. It was a total of 90 days of sleeping in the wilderness, I think. We shared tents, but more often than not, I decided to sleep under the stars 50 or 100 meters away from the group. Even a little thirst kept me awake at night, so I was always so far away that I could barely hear anything. If you know anything about Grand Gulch, it's a rich history with ruins around every corner. It is difficult for the average person to get permission to backpack through this area. However, it is difficult for the average person to get permission to carry a backpack through this area. We spent a total of 29 days in the area, only encountering one group at a time, so it's pretty far-fetched. This night was like all the others. I found a nice flat spot on top of a flat rock and kicked out some rocks to clear the spot. I laid down my mattress and fell asleep immediately. I had an alarm on my watch for 6 a.m. to wake me up and start the day, but for some reason I overslept, and my friend went to wake me up. He came up to me, and instead of waking me up, he asked, "Did you find this tonight?" Because there was an exquisitely carved arrowhead lying next to my head. I'm perfect, not a foot above my head. It was 6 inches long, the largest I've ever seen. I know that when I put my sleeping bag down, it wasn't there. I definitely cleaned my board before setting it up, so this thing couldn't be missed. I explained that I had never seen it before and was surprised I missed it. I was surprised, but at this point he realized I hadn't found it and said he was going to keep it. He picked it up and quickly split it into 2 pieces. We left the broken arrowhead there, and I know it wasn't there when I built my camp. I will always think about who put me next to my head that night, and why. This story was told to me by my cousin. When he told it to me, we were exchanging funny stories at my brother's cabin. He and 2 friends decided to get away for the weekend and go camping. They grabbed their gear, food, and a wagon and headed for the mountains. They checked the forecast ahead of time, and it turned out to be a sunny and rain-free weekend. Mid-July. When they set up camp, Dave tells them to eat magic mushrooms and go sightseeing. The other 2 laugh at this and tell him to be careful not to go too far. Several hours pass and Dave still hasn't returned, and as darkness falls, he peeks out of the bushes with a puzzled look on his face. He explained that his journey was going well until he took a turn and lost his way. He wandered through the forest for what seemed like an eternity, engrossed in thought, and before he stumbled and fell, he realized that the camp was in the opposite direction. He turned, rolled over onto his back, and then held out his hand. It's nearing evening. The team is getting ready for bed for the night, and the snow starts to fall. Then it starts to really snow, a blizzard, and they decide to pack everything into the van and leave the next day. Around 1 or 2 in the morning, Jake, my cousin, wakes up covered in goosebumps. He gets out of bed and walks around the van, first making sure it's locked, which it is. He turns around and tries to look out the window. It's completely cold. As he tries to make something out, he feels like someone or something is looking right at him. Eventually, she rejects him and falls asleep. The next morning, it snowed. Remembering the previous night, Jake goes to the window, feeling uncomfortable. To his horror, there are 2 paths leading to the van window, but neither of them leads to the van. He runs and tells his friends, and they agree to leave as soon as possible. They get to the nearest gas station, which is still a long way away. Their van breaks down, and while trying to figure out what to do, they go to the pumps and say, "We haven't seen weather like this in 20 years. Guys, be careful, something's wrong." Then he walks away. Out of nowhere, a big dark red van stops right in front of them, and the driver says sternly, "Quick, get in, I'll take you to the nearest town." Indecisive at first, but eventually they get in, and as they drive, he drives faster and faster until they reach a speed that winter does not recommend, and they are sure they are going to die, white and stupid, and just go. He brings them to the nearest town, opens the door and says, "Hurry up, get out." They agree, and before they can thank him, he makes a U-turn and heads in the direction they came from. They later learn that the first person they talked to at the gas station drove several miles to his death in a head-on collision. Such a crazy world we live in. I found this story interesting because it comes from a very honest person. I don't think it will have a lot of details, but let me know what you think. Are you sure there is something between them? I'm very interested in the guy who actually kicked me out. Very mysterious, isn't it? Oh, by the way, that would be near Jasper National Park in Canada if anyone is interested. This event is about 17 years old now, but it keeps popping into my head lately, and I want to share it. I haven't told many people about it, and they have never told me about it. So I was about 14 years old when I went on vacation with my horrible father, evil stepmother, and 2 stepdaughters. My stepdaughter and I had been living apart for 2 months, and my stepdaughter was about 12 years old. So we all headed out of the hotel to a bar where the rule was, if you held a glass, you could drink. We were typical teenagers, so we weren't allowed more than one. But anyway, my horrible father and evil stepmother had to call it a day. My stepdaughters and I had a great time. We felt very grown up and didn't want to go out for the night, but we agreed with my parents that we would stay until 11 and then go back to the hotel and wait for our parents at the hotel bar. We were having fun, and it was almost midnight, so we decided to go back to the hotel for a while. We didn't want to be late, and if we did as we were told, we might be allowed to do it again. So we started walking all together. The hotel was at the top of a hilly road. A car drove down this road and continued up the hill. No big deal, as it was just a car. However, after slowly coming back down the hill, a red flag went up. But then again, maybe they just got lost. But we went a little faster, and the same car slowly drove behind us. I felt very uneasy, and I ran to my sisters and screamed. But when I screamed, they were already beside us, and I yelled to the youngest stepdaughter too to call her parents because they had arrested stepdaughter. One and were trying to get him into the car. I screamed, ran to the car, grabbed the stepdaughter, and we got into a fight. I kicked the man in the shin, and eventually he let go of me. At that point, we stepped on him, and our parents started running towards us too, and the car drove off. I don't tell this story often because most people think I'm a liar. Honestly, it took me years to make sense of it and let it go. But anyway, it was about 8 years ago, meaning I was 10 or 11 years old, and living near Dallas, Texas. My single mom lived in her own world, so I would often run around our apartment complex and do whatever I wanted, mostly with my best friend Sarah. One day we ran into 2 boys who were 2 or more years older than us. I don't remember what they were like or how we interacted with them, but they dragged us into a shed behind the apartment building. They had to tell me they wanted to show me something, and I naively went with them into the barn. Sarah, however, must have known more about the situation than I did. It was just hanging around outside the palace. When I went inside, they locked the doors and then tied my hands. I know it sounds silly, but when I was 10 years old, I had no idea what was going on. I grew up with a very conservative Mormon grandmother. She would never have dared to pollute my mind with such dark ideas, even if it meant warning me about predators. I guess I thought it was all a game. Eventually, they started telling me they wanted me to take my shirt off and tried to scare me. I was so relieved that my friend Sarah was hanging outside because I started calling out to her and asking her to get my mom. The boys got scared and let me go. Everything was fine, and I don't know what happened to me, but now everyone is kicking me out. I never told my mom about it. I never understood what happened, and at the time it wasn't a big deal to me. I didn't pay much attention to it until one day I thought, so what? Anyway, I was lucky to have my friend Sarah by my side, because without her, things would have been very different. I've been a stay-at-home mom since 2012. My youngest started kindergarten this fall, and I have 2 daughters. It was mid-morning. Both of my daughters were at school, and I was just lying on my bed reading a book. Through the open door, I can see the living room, the hallway, the girls' room, the bathroom, and the playroom. I hear a noise and see a middle-aged white man wearing blue gloves, walking through my garage door like you're wearing a sack. I froze, not knowing what to do. I know my bagger. It's definitely not him, and the guy didn't knock. He immediately walks down the hall to my kids' rooms. I call my husband. I don't know why I didn't call 911, but my husband calls the police and his brother, who lives 2 minutes away. He must have gone to the gym because within minutes, I was already looking for the gun and hearing my dog crying. That afternoon, my daughter's asleep under the bed. I'm yelling. I hear the bell ring, and then a man comes out of the garage door at the entrance to the hallway, and my lab bell rings in the living room. He stops. No one is supposed to be home, and I say my husband is on his way. He mumbles something as he pulls out of the garage. Obviously, I'm completely vacant, but I get up, grab the things I'm holding, the tiger stick my mother-in-law bought home for a mission trip to Africa, and run out to follow this guy. The car is gone, and he's gone, and my mother-in-law and the police at the same time, not a minute after this guy got out. I told them it was okay. Maybe he had the wrong house or something. The police didn't pass the farmer's car on the way into the neighborhood. We only have one entrance to the neighborhood, and that's where it hit me. The gloves he was wearing. They were the blue gloves my husband used to clean me in his office. They are on the table by the garage door before I go. In the house, I run back and check my daughter's room, then open the back playroom and the playroom windows on both sides. I knew it was a man because the weather had been hot all week. I kept all the windows closed and locked, even the curtains. And the curtains were open too, so he came into my daughter's rooms. About 2 years ago, I worked part-time at a popular pizza chain. I worked full-time during the day, so my shift at the pizzeria lasted from 6 a.m. to 12 p.m. I liked the job because I made good money, and it was easy, but I hated working at night because it was very hectic. One night, we called 30 minutes before closing time to be sent to the worst place in town. I took the order because the manager had sent another driver home early, since it was a rough night. So I rushed to get the pizza delivered. After about 20 minutes, the GPS reported that I had arrived. I couldn't read the house number because it was dark and there were no lights on any of the houses. Out of caution, I called the customer to see if he could turn on the lights. He didn't answer until the 6th call. He told me that there are 2 garbage cans at his house near the driveway and the lights are off, and he can't turn them on. I start walking from the yard to the front door when I see a man looking at me through the window. I say hello to him, but there is no response. He doesn't even move to open the door. Goosebumps run down my spine, and I decide to turn around and walk back to my car. I call the customer back to pick up his pizza from my car, and he tells me in a very slow and hoarse voice to ignore his roommate. The car is unlocked, and if I can get the pizza down to the basement, it's only because he rents the basement. While I was on the phone, a light showed from the window. and that's when I saw the person across from me talking to me on the phone. I hung up the phone and left. The phones were turned off in the restaurant, and all complaints had to wait until the next day. But I'm telling you right now, I'm not going to go around basements and bring pizza for dinner. When I was in 6th grade, I had a friend who had a Ouija board, and we never parted ways. I begged him to let me play with it, but my dad bought it instead. Everyone in my family checked me out except me and my dad. An hour later, we had to go to dinner, and we decided to play to see what would happen. This is where I made the first mistake, and afterward I asked with the second, "Is there anyone we can start with?" I now know that this opens the door for anything. It could be a demon, a spirit, or anything. And to prevent that from happening, you have to ask a certain person, and the person we talked to was named Dee Dee, and apparently he was killed by her father at the age of 35. We finished the game late because we had to leave, and I remember asking, and the whole time, the only people who said I was moving it were my 2 sisters, because both my father and I continued to not move the tablet. When we got home late at night, I had a very strange feeling. When it was time to go to bed, I didn't turn off the light and I couldn't sleep that night. I was living in a big city in Texas at the time, and that was the last time I played the game before moving. About 6 months later, even though we had moved to a smaller city in Texas, something made me want to play Ouija again. My sister and I were playing. The candle went out, and he said he wanted to keep my sister forever and started yelling about it. We pretty much finished the game, and I didn't play for about a month after that. We played with a family friend, talked to a younger girl who had OD'd, and everyone who wasn't playing at the time believed we were moving her. The last time we played was with my mom, because I always did, and we tried to talk to her deceased grandmother. My mom said if it was him, I didn't know his name. The board kept writing the first 2 letters but never wrote the whole name. Before I could finish talking, the board continued to write Lil Pip and Gustav. I love Pip so much, and we continued to ask questions I didn't know the answers to. At the bottom of the board, an energetic woman appeared behind his back, and the sign immediately moved. I never knew what that meant until we did the Ouija board, and at some point the board kept moving in the direction of O and Z, knowing that my spirit was behind me. I will never say his name because it overwhelmed me, and we finished the game. As we were saying goodbye, I started crying hysterically, but I couldn't help it, and it got really weird. At night, we would hear scratching and whispering. At first, my parents called it BS and thought it was my 2 aunts doing it. At one point, my sister said she heard footsteps behind her and thought someone was chasing her, but there was no one. A friend of my dad's was a ghost hunter, or an expert, if you can call them that. So we asked him to talk to my brothers. He kept shaking from my sister's room and didn't believe us at first. He decided to investigate, but he started with a nightly sound recording in the room that captured whispers, voices, and things like that, and we could never make out what was being said, but something could be heard. The last part of the investigation was the sleepover. My father's friend, and his wife stayed at our house from 11:12 to 3-4 a.m. Me, my siblings, my mother stayed in a hotel for the night, and they stayed home. I have never seen my father so scared in my life. I don't want to explain all the details because it's not necessary, but here are the most interesting points. So, at some point they pulled out the spirit box. My dad was new to the whole thing, and as soon as they took it out, the spirit box started calling out the names of my dad's friend. My father didn't hear it. He then proceeded to insult my dad and them, and started swearing. It seemed like a lot of people were talking. We had beanbags in our house at that time, so the beanbags were always up, as was the piano in the house. It was almost over, but all the cameras were gone, and my dad suddenly went outside, and all of a sudden the spinning beam turned on its own. My dad still talks about that moment, and my dad called my mom every 5 seconds after that because she was freaking out. I never saw the Ouija board after all that, and our house was cleaned out. I think the board is locked up somewhere. I don't know where, but I'm glad it's honest. I know a lot of people will never believe this story, and that's okay. I know people who have had similar experiences, and they understand how it feels. I can only assure you not to use a Ouija board because it is not a toy. One evening I was walking down the center lane of a 3-lane city street. Suddenly, a car appears to my right in my blind spot and nearly hits me. I watch as it brakes sharply and swerves into the lane. I look to see if the driver is distracted, and I see a man sitting behind the wheel drinking something from a brown bottle. Then the man comes up to me and screams at the top of his lungs. Not wanting to get involved, I change lanes to the left lane to get away from this guy. I can still hear him yelling, so I turn on my rearview camera and see this man swerve into 2 lanes from the far right lane to get behind me. He then starts accelerating as if trying to hit me from behind, and when I see him a few inches from my bumper, I decide to run a red light and turn right in front of the 2 lanes of traffic, hoping he'll leave me alone this time. I look at the rearview camera again and see that the man is following me, trying to hit me from behind. I startle and slow down, but when I look back, he doesn't let me pass. He slips behind me and tries to keep up. The freeway on-ramp is visible in the distance, and I speed up, hoping to lose him on the freeway. At the entrance, 2 lanes converge. I let a car pass in front of the merge, hoping it will create a buffer between me and the man following me. I look back at the camera and see this guy on the curb, in the bushes, on the side of the ramp, letting another car pass and crashing into me. At this point, I'm going about 100 mph in fear for my life, so I slow down and call 911. I explain the situation to the dispatcher, and he advises me to try to get to safety and such. Then a man grabs me and starts coming at me on the freeway. He tries several times to turn me around or push me off the road. I slow down, hoping he'll let me pass, but he slows down too, and that's when I see his wife, a passenger, throw a bottle at my car. For a second I lose my vision as the car is covered in a dark, frothy liquid. I think to myself that this is surely his road rage. I look back and see him driving down the freeway. Ready to leave, I turn onto the next freeway, thinking I can get out of this situation. While I'm doing this, some person sees me, makes a 4-way turn in the exit lane, and tries to stop me again at the freeway exit. I am then forced to speed down city streets and end up running a red light next to this guy. I look at him and roll down my window. He's yelling all kinds of obscenities at me. His wife is yelling something too. I look in the back seat and see 2 kids in the car. When I was on speakerphone with the dispatcher, he heard all of this and told me to go look. I had a lot of work to do at this time. I want to get away from him, so I turn back onto the freeway. But he drives after me again and blocks the plastic construction lane to do so. He drives after me again and tries to hit me from behind, but as I cross the bridge to get onto the freeway, I look back and see him holding something in my direction. Suddenly I hear a very loud noise, and that's when the dispatcher on the phone yells, "Did he shoot you? Are you okay?" I think I've been shot and start yelling, "He shot me, he's going to kill me." Realizing there was no way to escape, I stopped and the man fled. Fortunately, there was no broken glass and I wasn't hurt in any way. The dispatcher tells me to pull over to the nearest safe place, and I head to the mall parking lot. I tell the dispatcher the make, color, and model of the car, as well as the part number. Obviously, as I'm walking there, I'm worried about this guy following me, but they immediately dispatch an officer to file a police report. While I was waiting for the officer, I realized that my dash cam was also recording, so I hit the save button. When the officer arrived, I told him my story in detail. I also told him that I have videotapes of everything we drive in my car, and for the most part it does no harm. The officer then informed me that since I was not hurt and the car was not damaged, there was nothing they could do. I was very discouraged by this statement, but there was nothing to be done. I hope it doesn't happen to me again.